Good afternoon to you. Mark Suttoth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your weekly off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. Obviously, there's no hurricanes right now. It's winter time officially and meteorologically. That started yesterday with the winter solstice. And hooray, today, starting now, the days get longer in the northern hemisphere. Not very perceptible, but it is happening, and that is good. We're headed back towards things warming up. It just takes time. Quite the snowy background there, and we got the off-season logo going. It is wintertime. There's a lot to cover, even in the off-season. A few little trivial facts here and there, some hurricane stuff for next season, things we look for, some lower 48 weather, and just kind of keeping weather on the top of your mind, and some lighthearted conversation, if you will. That's what we do. That's what it's all about in the off-season. So let's take a look as we begin at the Anomalies map. This is one of my favorite things to watch in the off-season, and it shows us the La Nina still holding on strong in the equatorial Pacific. There's the equator right there. All of these blues indicating below average sea surface temperature anomalies. And in the Atlantic, these are all above average anomalies through the tropical Atlantic, the subtropical Atlantic, the far northwest Atlantic, which is just ridiculously warm. Some of those values up there are 5 Celsius above the long-term average. That is not a misprint or a typo or some kind of a goof or an anomaly in the data. It's actually a real anomaly. We're talking 4 to 5 Celsius above the long-term average in the extreme northwest Atlantic, even over here in the northeastern Atlantic off the coast of Morocco, and near the Canary Islands and the Iberian Peninsula here. Water temperatures even this area a little bit warmer than average. It's just the Atlantic's not cooling down right now, at least the subtropics and the deep tropics. Haven't checked the far North Atlantic, but overall things are holding pretty much where they were through a good deal of the warm months of 2020 and into the fall and now into the winter, with a cold Pacific and a warm Atlantic. And this is what we will be watching to see how it progresses, changes, or otherwise as we end the year, which is coming up, and get into next year. The other way we watch it is through the SOI, the Southern Oscillation Index, and we track that through the Queensland government website down in Australia. And this is just a very simple index measuring the pressure differences between Tahiti and Darwin, all of those areas, of course, in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. And it is that difference, and they've been tracking this for a long, long time, many decades, a very tried and true measure of what the pressure patterns are like and how that can affect their weather. The Australians really watch the Southern Oscillation and the ENSO effect, the El Nino part of the Southern Oscillation phenomenon, because it drives their weather patterns. The climate is very much dependent upon how the wind directions are and the moisture feeds, etc., and this is a good way to track that. And everything is just up and up and up gradually, but it's gone up since we really last looked at this a week ago. Today's contributor 22, and the 90-day average now at a healthy 9.7. It's typically when we get to about +7 or -7, depending on which way you're. Like an El Nino would be -7 and below, and La Nina is usually -7 and above, if I'm not mistaken. And this is solidly in the La Nina category, and even the 30-day is pretty healthy compared to the last 30-day average from November. And we're tacked on quite a few points there to that index. So this is a nice way to look at it. I don't see this changing much at all anytime soon. We can go look at the subsurface data, and this is all just so neat to be able to watch. This is a slice through the Pacific of this, basically. It's like you took a slice right through here and looked at it in the vertical. This is what you would get. And you can see this very large area of subsurface cold in a good deal of the tropical Pacific. The warm pool is literally kept at a distance here, with strong trade winds blowing across the eastern Pacific, keeping this down where it belongs. I mean, these are warm anomalies. Make no mistake, there's a lot of warm water lurking well below, more than 100 meters below in the western Pacific. But all of this cold water relative to average holding on strong No signs of this changing, and that's generally what happens. Just to give you a little clue, when those trade winds that are keeping this in this state relax, or if they reverse direction and you get westerly wind bursts of an anomalous nature, stronger westerly winds than you're used to seeing, then you sort of let up on that pressure, if you will, that's keeping that warm pool in the far western Pacific, and then it is able to kind of circulate to the east through these little Kelvin waves. Actually, they're fairly large, just little pieces of energy that come through the ocean and eventually make their way to the surface. We're not seeing any evidence of that anytime soon. I don't think we're going to hold on to this strength of a La Nina going into the summer of 2021, but the odds of an El Nino for next year, and that is the key. El Nino is what squashes Atlantic hurricane activity. I just don't see it happening. It's real early. Stranger things have happened, right? You can theoretically go from a solid La Nina like we have now to an El Nino, but that is really, really hard, and I cannot remember in my career, and we're talking more than 20 years now, that I've ever seen that happen. And so this just keeps on keeping on, and this is something we'll watch every week or so. We'll check in on this and see how things are going, and eventually we'll start looking at some forecasts from some of the plumes that are out there once we get into the early part of next year. And I mean, heck, when we get to January, then we have less than 5 months to go, roughly, until hurricane season begins. And by March, if you think about it, it goes by fast. 90 days. It just goes by quick. The 6 months of the off season. This is another fascinating graphic. I love using this during the season. It helps us to spot these areas of energy down here in the tropics. And you notice the lack of energy right now, or at least bundled energy. There's plenty of energy down there. The sun is still beating down on the tropics, and that energy is still stored in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, the South Atlantic. Yes, there's still energy, but it's not showing up in the form of sensible weather, in the form of storms or cyclones. There's very little. There's just one little small piece of energy there. Another little piece here, we call this vorticity, just off the coast of Africa. And this is very common to see coming off of these mountainous areas of Colombia in South America. So conversely, up in the northern latitudes over North America, big chunk of mid-latitude energy here, more energy off the east coast. It's all in the higher latitudes now. Well, not all of it, but a good chunk of it. And this piece of energy right here, this vorticity in the atmosphere, is a telltale sign that change is upon us, big time. And it equates very nicely to this graphic here from the National Weather Service homepage. All of this brown that you see through here, it'll be easier to outline it in black. These are wind advisories and warnings and so forth, winter storm and weather advisories. I mean, it's just nasty. And the reason is, and we go back to that vorticity map, this piece of energy here is ushering in, there's a low pressure system up here, some very, very cold air coming out of Canada. And that is going to drain down into the lower 48 in this direction and eventually bring very cold weather to the east, colder than we've seen in a long time. I saw the low in Wilmington, where I am, for Friday morning. Going to be about 24 degrees, maybe a little colder, maybe a little warmer. You never know in the low-lying areas where the cold, dense air can settle in. We will see some upper teens, and I'll show you this in a really cool map in just a second. A few advisories in the lee of the lakes up here in New York, Pennsylvania, and parts of Ohio. The Weather Service page running slow. That's fun. I've been reading about some of the problems they've been having with bandwidth, and just, we'll get into that later. Somebody in my house making noise. We'll get into, everybody's home. School's out. The holidays are here. But at some point, we got to talk about this whole, and now's not the time. But you've been reading about it. Just to give you a little teaser. Bandwidth issues. They're starting to restrict access, and the new radar that the Weather Service debuted is just a big disaster, apparently. I use Radar Scope on my iPhone and my iPad, to be honest with you. I think it's incredible. But, anyway, we got to pay more attention to the weather. I mean, it affects every single thing we do every day. Why is there not more money put into it? You got to be kidding me. Again, story for another day. Today, let's try to be positive. All right, so downwind of these lakes here, Lake Ontario, you got Watertown down to Fulton, and then over towards Niagara Falls, Buffalo. The usual lake effect areas. You do have the fetch coming across these lakes. The lakes are warmer. You have unstable air, moisture, and the wind will blow across. And these, like the Tug Hill Plateau in this area, it's a little bit of uplift in here, just enough, wrings out that moisture with other processes going on, and you get some lake effect snows. Nothing you can't handle, nothing ridiculous, but it's that time of year for sure. We're still looking for some rain for this area. They badly need it, especially Las Vegas. Been since April that you've had any measurable rain, and maybe we'll get some in the coming days. Let's take a look at the GFS real quick. There is that low pressure area over Montana. A good friend of mine I've known a long time. His name is Mark Avery. Works up at the Weather Service in Glasgow, and I think that's where it is. He's been posting on his personal Facebook about how darn cold it is. Well, there you go. There's more cold air coming. So this cold air coming out of Canada, and I'm going to show you this from a different perspective in a moment. Here's another dome of cold air. It's modified somewhat, but it's sitting over the southeast. You got this general troughing pattern. This is going to reinforce that. Still dry in the desert southwest, California and vicinity, although it's been fairly wet in the Pacific Northwest over here with some storms moving in, but nothing for the areas further to the south. So we put this into motion. You see that low pressure area scooting across Minnesota, and behind it, it's like it opens up the gates here, and that cold air drains down out of Canada very efficiently, pushes in. You're going to develop a front here, and why not? You got this high sitting over here pumping in warm, moist air. This air is more buoyant and energy laden. This air is denser and drier. The two butt up against each other, and you're going to have some problems. We're going to look at that in more detail in a moment. So this slides on through. This is Christmas Eve now, at least Wednesday night into Thursday. And you can see that cold air, some thunderstorms in the deep south, maybe some severe weather. We'll address that in a moment. But man, look at that. Just cold, maybe some snow as far south as Georgia and Alabama, eastern Tennessee. Definitely along the spine of the Appalachians. Windy. It's just going to be, I won't say brutal, but it's going to be a big shock to the system. This cold air mass coming down. If you go into any Christmas Eve services, Christmas Eve night, midnight mass, or anything like that, midnight services, and you're in the east there, it's going to be nasty. When you get out, it's going to be quite a bit colder than when you went in, believe me. That pushes offshore, and people are going to wake up on Friday. Let's go back. There it is. Friday morning, Christmas Day. Fresh snowpack in some of the areas, especially in the lee of the lakes up here, parts of Ohio, and a few areas of the Appalachians. Some northwest flow snow in areas like Banner Elk, and maybe Spruce Pine, Bakersville, that region. Maybe Asheville, but definitely up in the higher peaks there. Roan Mountain, Grandfather Mountain, windy, and very, very cold. No doubt about it. So this goes on through, and that's only 72 hours out, isn't it? Yeah. So that goes on through, and then finally, look out in the west, maybe, just maybe, some moisture coming in with the Pacific system. That would be nice to see. They could really use it out there, but it doesn't get far enough south to help our friends. Not quite yet. This is now 6 days out. There's another system that comes in, and that might, look at that, out at about a week's time. My good friend Tracy that works as a news producer out in Las Vegas, I'll have to tell her, fire up the weather team. It's like San Diego. It's like, really? They actually have a paid full-time meteorologist? I mean, there's no joking about it. It's just there's hardly any weather. In the summer it's hot, in the winter it's cold, and it's dry all the time. San Diego is always 72 degrees and sunny, right? Well, that might change in about a week, where you have a day or two of high elevation snow, maybe some lower elevation light rain, and more storminess in the east, but nothing that's going to make big news headlines or pique my interest. No blockbuster storms or anything like that. But generally, this is a cold-looking pattern, the coldest that we've seen to end the year in quite some time. It's been a few years since we've seen it this cold, and we're talking highs in the 30s and 40s for my area of North Carolina, for example. Christmas, the day after Christmas, and maybe next Saturday. And then the new year looks like it's going to be cold as well. We'll talk about that on Monday. We're going to say goodbye to 2020. For most of us, see you later. Don't let the door hit you in the you-know-what as we get ready to celebrate a new year. But it looks cold and somewhat stormy, but again, nothing, common sense prevailing that we can't handle, right? So check this out. I haven't showed you this map probably ever, and there's a lot of different layers of the atmosphere that we can look at, and Levi has done a great job. There's other sites, Weather Nerds does the same, where you can look at these different layers, paid subscription sites, weather models, whatever, they're out there. This is from Tropical Tidbits, Levi Cowan's site, and these are the dew points at 2 meters, right? So that's about 6 feet above the ground, which is where most of us live. I don't know very many people that are more than 2 meters tall. A few, right? But seriously, that's where we live, and so this is where, I wanted to show you, and this is really neat. So all the blues that you see are lower dew point air mass regions. And here's the low pressure area up in Montana, and here's some moisture feeding up ahead of it. Higher dew points there. The very high dew points, relatively speaking, out over the warm waters of the Gulf and the Atlantic. Lower dew points because the waters are colder, so there's not as much energy available, evaporation, and that kind of thing. So watch what happens. This is really neat. We move this through time. Look at that. Come on, man. Isn't life... we have all these problems that we're dealing with, and the bickering, and just the BS that's on a daily basis right in front of us. But the beauty of watching the fluidity of the atmosphere, is that a word? It is now. The dynamics. That's so cool. We rewind it, go back, and you can just watch the atmosphere. And this is a computer simulation. We besmirch, the radar thing that the Weather Service put out was a failure. Well, this is a huge success, this particular product. And there's plenty of others. We don't want to be all negative, seriously. This is so neat to see. The atmosphere literally in motion, and you can see the dew points move around. And I'm going to just press play here and let it go so I can point out a couple things. So you see the cold air drains in, and I talk about how that's much denser. So this air is dense. This air is much lighter and moisture laden, and so it's easier to push around. And the dense air spills in like I talk about, molasses. If you drip it on a table and it spreads out, that's what this looks like. And you can just see how the atmosphere works. We're going to bring in all that cold air the rest of this week, and you can just see it again. I'm just fascinated. I could look at that all day. So cool. You see it come in. It works its way down into the Florida Peninsula even. So CJ, down here in Venice area, yes sir, it's going to be chilly. Look out. You're going to have to put on something. I should have sent you a hoodie after all, huh? CJ's probably laughing. Yep, it's going to be chilly, so be ready for it. All right? All right. Severe weather will be a problem. Not today. And a little bit tomorrow along the southern tier of the country. But day 3, that's where, and look at that. My neck of the woods, a slight risk in late December. Wow, that's got to be a powerful cold front coming through. We will probably have some thunderstorms in eastern North Carolina. There's going to be some down along the Gulf Coast and interior areas as well the day before. We'll go back to that and show you that real quick. Don't want to skip over it and ignore it. Marginal. I bet this might, somewhere in here, might get an upgrade to slight tomorrow. We'll see. But what are the hazards? You look at that and you go, well, what the heck? Small 2% tornado, higher percent 5 of wind, and no, not a real big hail producing setup, so that's good. But just be on the lookout if you're traveling. A lot of people using the interstate systems through here to travel. Be careful, be mindful of it. Even heavy rain, right, can be a problem, let alone thunderstorms and wind gusts and all that. So just be aware of it. All right, got to keep you safe and alive, because without you, there's no reason for me to be here, right? That's what we say anyway. Hey, look, check this out. Last night, I gave it an attempt to check out the Great Conjunction. Everything has to have a name. People calling it the Christmas star, and I understand that, but it's not a star at all. It's 2 planets, and a whole bunch of moons and the rings of Saturn. And the way it is that they're both so close, about 1/10 of a degree, if I'm remembering correctly, in astronomical terms, apart in the sky. But they're both far apart, like this way. It's just the way that we see them, they look close together. And they got really close, so they look like, especially if you have bad eyesight in the distance like I do, they look like one bright star. But it was really two planets, and they were fairly low in the western sky. I got out my telescope. I have a 4-inch refracting telescope, and I took my iPhone and put it up to the eyepiece. It was very, very difficult to get it lined up. You can just barely see the rings of Saturn right there. Probably not even on the video here, but they're there. It looks like one continuous ring, but it's made up of probably thousands. And these are the different moons of Jupiter, believe it or not, right there. And then there's Jupiter itself, and that's not bad for a little small telescope and trying to hold my iPhone just steady enough to catch that. I was able to see it, but got to give credit where credit is due, and our good friend Ed Piotrowski, who plays Ed Helms in a lot of films. I'm just kidding. He looks like him, though, doesn't he? Sure does. He gets that a lot. Ed did a great job. He's got a much bigger telescope than I, and he's got a Nikon D750, and he knows how to do it. And I mean, come on, that's pretty next level, isn't it? Now, he stacked these images. This is not, if you look through the eyepiece, exactly what you would see. But he did a good job processing it, and this got a lot of, look, 7.7 thousand retweets. That's pretty good. Congratulations, Ed. He's not far from me over in South Carolina at one of the TV stations there. And that's what it looked like. And that's what 1/10 of a degree of separation in the sky looks like through a telescope. This will be visible for the next several nights as the two planets eventually kind of cross and then separate. They got closer over time in the sky, the way that it's kind of like, I was trying to explain this to my wife, that you ever been on a school bus or any other, like, local transit bus, and the windshield wipers are going and they're out of sync, and then they eventually get into sync, right? Have you ever seen that? And so this is kind of like that eventually, the way the planets orbit the sun, they all go around the sun, eventually they kind of line up. But nothing is perfect. It's not a perfect line. Even our planets and the sun and everything are not perfect spheres. I mean, you know about all this, right? You took astronomy and physics, didn't you? But it looks close enough. And so it's called the ecliptic, the plane of the ecliptic, where these planets are along the sky. They're not just random. The planets are all in a certain plane. We call that the ecliptic. Once in a while, they get close enough to each other that you get a conjunction, where they kind of all come together, and this is one of those, and it just happens to be the Great Conjunction. Hate to burst your bubble, but it doesn't mean anything good. It doesn't mean anything bad. It just is what it is, and that is spectacular, especially when you look at it through the telescope like Mr. Piotrowski showed us. So you can still see it. It's not gone. It didn't happen. It's gone. Never going to see it again. It's still there. They'll be almost as close tonight. And so if you go look out and it's clear, west-southwest, kind of low on the horizon, you're not looking up high. It's kind of low, like right above most of the rooftops of your neighborhood. You'll see a fairly bright area. And if you squint or you get some binoculars, you'll notice these two dots right next to each other. That would be Jupiter and Saturn. And there you go. You can still see the great, I'm trying to get me out of there, the Great Conjunction of 2020. All right. Well, that is it from me for today. Again, mostly lighthearted, just kind of going over a few things, keeping me, hopefully, in the front of your mind a little bit with everything else going on in the world. Oh, my goodness. I guess sometimes the weather can be a good distraction, especially when it's not turning against us and giving us more headaches to deal with. And so far, we're ending the season and the winter season is just getting started. We're ending the year on a fairly tame note, and that's good. Although, like I said, it's going to be quite cold, so just be ready for that. All right. If you are on Patreon as part of our crowdfunding group, don't forget, I am updating and uploading new podcast episodes every Wednesday. We're looking back at the year 2005, so the latest episode will be available tomorrow evening. I'm also finally finishing up the remaining episodes of the Hurricane Highway streaming series, TV series, if you want to call it that. I have 3 episodes left. Those are almost finished. I'm a couple months behind, but the hurricane season is the reason why. Ironic, isn't it? And then we will really be looking ahead to 2021 and some amazing things that we have once we get into January. It's going to be incredible. So just, if you follow and support us on Patreon and you hadn't logged in a while, don't forget, we do have stuff going on even in the off season, especially on Patreon. All right, you guys have a great rest of your week. As always, thanks for tuning in. Have a safe travel period if you're going anywhere for Christmas. I will be back with you next Monday or Tuesday, always once a week, though, that's for sure. And we'll talk about the weather and the tropics and everything in between, at least weather-related. We're going to stick to that. And, we'll go from there. All right? All right. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack. Thanks for watching. We'll talk again next Monday.